Welcome to the LIfePro podcast, where today I have the pleasure of having Zoe Moyer, who is an MD PhD dropout turned executive coach. Today's topic is human factors engineering, which I don't quite understand. So I'm really interested in hearing your expertise in this. It's not a term I've ever used. But before we get into the topic, how are you today, Zoe?
I'm fantastic.
Great.
And for qualification, I will also say I am not a human factors scientist, so my expertise is, you know,
Well,
qualified.
it's it's well beyond my qualifications. So when in comparison, you are the expert here. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit more about yourself and your journey in life?
Sure. I would say if I were to go with the medium length journey, I started in California, born and raised. I went to Boston for college. During college, I did a lot of random things to try to figure out who I was. I went to Madagascar. Met the Minister of Health there. I studied synthetic nanoparticles at MIT. I learned to love ice climbing. I got kicked out of my housing and lived in a van. And then I landed a fellowship with Madeline Albright, who I met, who was lovely. And I went to the World Health Organization, working directly under the Assistant Director General there. And that was a really profound experience. I was also there traveling around Europe at the height of really the of ISIS and the Syrian migration, and was introduced to all of these individuals who were migrating, and that made me want to spend more of my time at the medical level, working directly with hands-on with people. But I still had that love of science. I went back to Silicon Valley. I worked in the lab for a little bit, and then I did that very arduous MD PhD application process, ultimately landing myself in Virginia, where I fell in love with leadership, interestingly. And so I was my medical class president. I was the chair of the American Medical Association's scientific committee, and then we hit a pandemic, and I completely changed careers and started to pursue health leadership and coaching full time.
That's great. Now it's getting accepted to an MD PhD program is very arduous, and I'm sure very difficult. Took a lot of steps, a lot of hard work to get to that point. And I don't think most people, once you get into that program, would give it all up. Like, I mean, what prompted you obviously to make that shift and find the courage to actually give up all the hard work and just pivot so fast?
Yeah, that would probably come down to 2 weeks of crying nonstop, if I were to be honest.
Yeah.
It was, there was a nice, I mean, not nice, but there was a convening of all things at the same time. And what had happened was I had been engaged. I was in a relationship that became violent, and it became violent uh, at the end of 2019, and then very conveniently right before the pandemic. And so because of that, I was trying to study for my medical boards, and I just was like, I can't, I couldn't even process what had happened. I needed to go and study for my exam. And so I left. I went back to live with my parents. They were very concerned because I'm just crying and studying. It wasn't very clear. But when we hit the pandemic, that was the first time where I had a moment to um, pause in life and think about what I was doing and
Yeah.
ask, is this really what I want to be doing still? And what I came to was the realization that it's really hard to be a clinician or a nurse or in health in general in the US, because our system is so broken, and we ask so much of our clinicians and our nurses and every provider at every level. And we ask them specifically to sacrifice themselves at the expense that treat patients at the expense of themselves. And so I wanted to fix that. And so I was like, I'm gonna completely change my career.
Yeah.
And and here I am.
So I'm a poker player. A poker term that I use constantly is pot committed, right? Which means you put so much into the pot, you can't give up at this point, right? So that's kind of relevant here. Um, and I think a lot of people followed your same path and like put so much work into something that they thought was best for them to come to realize that it might not be, but they feel trapped. Do you have any advice for people listening? I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this topic. Um, how did you find the courage? What advice do you give them to grasp as much courage as you did and make those changes?
Yeah. And I think I have to start from being an MD PhD student, I came from a place of privilege in the sense that I didn't have 2000 or sorry, $200,000 worth of medical debt when I decided to switch. And so that the economic factor is very hard. And that's a tough decision. But I think at another level, it's we all really like to lie to ourselves. And so we get into these situations where we find ourselves that we're lying to ourselves, but it's really hard to lie to yourself forever. It's really easy to lie to yourself maybe for like a day, a month. Maybe
Yeah.
you'll start the gym membership in January, but like maybe you can get through grad school. But eventually a lot of the people that I've talked to who go down this path that isn't what they really expected get to that critical point and they're like, this isn't, I mean, you have the midlife crisis. Like, this wasn't the
Yeah.
career that I expected. This isn't what I wanted. Um, but on the flip side, it's actually research shows this. It's really hard for us to know what we enjoy doing. We have a much easier time saying like, oh, I don't like this. Um, so if you don't hate something, you can easily kind of end up on this path of low key mediocrity. Like,
Yeah.
I don't love this. So what I would advise is develop your, personal board of directors, like the people who really know you very, very well, and have them tell you what you like because they
Yeah.
probably know better than you.
Yeah. I think that's remarkable. I think sometimes creating that platform to reflect and really understand how we're feeling, I think that if in life, when we're doing the things that we like to do, we're pulled to do them. Like we gravitate toward them. We don't have to really push ourselves to go to class or go to work or do those things, because if we really enjoy it, it becomes like something that we're connected to
Mm.
higher, bigger than that. There's a bigger bond. So I'm definitely an advocate of following your heart and following what your passion, and really making the decisions. And I've faced with the same challenges. There was more of a logical direction of my life, and then more of a like emotional, and try to find like that blend between the two. It's challenging, but you know, I love what you advise, and I will implement the same things in my own life. So as far as board of directors, like, you know, and kind of related to it, are there people in your life that have, inspired you or mentored you to get to this point, to get the most out of life?
Oh, yes. Um, Very much so. Um, and I think that, there are a few people that immediately come to mind when you ask me this question. I think my research mentor in college, Pam Basto, immediately comes to mind. She brought me into this very big fancy research lab, which was Dr. Robert Langer's MIT research lab, and uh, had faith in me to do serious work immediately. And I think that when people have that kind of faith in others, it's just tremendous what can happen. So because of her, I was like, I can definitely become an MD PhD. I believe in myself.
Yeah.
And then I think, we also have, I would have to say also, Keiji Fukuda from the World Health Organization. He is the first one who taught me how to navigate politics. And I don't think I was a very good student of his. I think I had a very hard time in just grappling with all of the different dimensions of you're going into meetings, you already know what's going to be the outcome, but you still need to go in with pose and respect and a great amount of humility. And so yeah, he was fantastic. But we also have a lot of those informal mentors, and I think that James Wan from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia would be one of those for me. He's the one who introduced me to human factors engineering, and that profoundly changed the way I think about solving problems.
So perfect segue to our topic. What is human factors engineering? What does that even mean? Because
Um,
you're the first time I've ever heard the term was from you.
well, it is something that I hope becomes very popular everywhere you go. Human factors engineering at its core says, let's make systems where you can't fail, or at least it's really, really hard to fail. And so in healthcare, this is really important because we don't want to, for example, have it so that a nurse could accidentally give a patient an overdose of some medication or something, else. Like we don't want a surgeon to operate on the wrong leg. Those are times that it's really critical to make certain that we can't fail. Um, a difference between human factors engineering and not having human factors engineering is traditionally we had this mentality of, oh, you just have to not make mistakes. Like as a human, just don't make mistakes. And there was actually this fantastic book that came out that was To Err is Human. Of course we make mistakes. And
Yeah.
so that's what human factors engineering tries to solve is how do we make it really hard to make mistakes? Not because we're just very in control, but because we know how humans operate and we know that they will fail at times and we can mitigate that and we can prevent it through different solutions.
So last week's episode was about artificial intelligence. So would you say that human factors engineering is attempting to bridge the gap between artificial intelligence and human intelligence?
That's an interesting question. I would say that artificial intelligence is very exciting to me. I look my one of my good friends, Shinkun Ni, at Stanford, is trying to use causal inference to do treatment effect, which is basically to say how are patients going to best be treated if you're given patient A, what is the best course for them as opposed to patient B. So that's incredible. I think that there are elements of AI that could be implemented into human factors engineering, where there is that human computer interface. And now the computer is saying, here's some really good solutions for you. Drive down this path and we'll have fewer errors. But I mean, I think it's not necessarily any more of a relationship than anything else that AI is going to be. And I think it's going to be integrated into all of society.
So with a background in medicine, how do you feel that hospitals are going to use human factors engineering in their process?
So a lot of hospitals right now are converting over to something called HRO. So those are high reliability organizations. And the principle behind HRO is we want high quality hospitals. We want hospitals that are going to reliably provide certain care at a high quality equitably across the spectrum. We want there's an acronym called STEEP. So, and that includes timely and efficient, and it has a lot of ease in the middle.
Mm.
And the reason that we want this is because historically our hospital systems have been fee for service, which basically means you get paid kind of regardless of outcomes. And that gives us some really, really incredible clinicians who have specialized in very minute types of care. But it also maybe makes it harder for there to be a real economic return on something like teaching someone to eat a healthier diet.
Right. So I understand how, big organizations can use human factors engineering in their process, but how does the average person listening here or the average person in general, how can we use it to improve our life?
Yeah. I would say that I use it for my own personal life all the time. And the reason I do this is because I I know I'm going to fail just like
Yeah.
everyone else. And I want to make certain that I still get to live the quality of life that I want to live. And I can do that. For example, research says that we get the same amount of joy from a real life plant as a fake plant. In my background, I have a plant. It's fake. I've killed
Right.
so many plants. I do
Yeah.
not have a green thumb. But for me, that plant looks alive. It
Mm.
gives me the same kinds of, joyous outcries. I mean, the fact that I get to see that plant is going neurologically going to be beneficial for me. Um, and I can't kill it. That is a great way to implement human factors engineering at a very simple
Yeah.
level.
Yeah. And obviously the point of this whole process is to prevent failure. But is it ever going to be really possible to be 100% fail safe?
I think that we can get really close. Technically, someone who has a hysterectomy could still, at a very low, rare level, become pregnant. Nothing is impossible. But that doesn't mean that we can't make it essentially impossible. And so, if we're making the determination of, does this have to be perfectly impossible? That's just another way for us to fail. If we're setting ourselves up for failure in the first place by saying this has to be a perfect system, we're never going to get anywhere.
Right.
The best way is to say, I'm going to get as close to perfectly impossible as possible.
What is the just culture algorithm? What does that mean?
Yeah. So that's a great one for interacting with humans. Essentially, this says, as the default, the issue is not necessarily going to be with the last person who touched a problem. It could be, for example, upstream of that last person. It could be with the system. On rare occasions, maybe someone is actually trying to take you down and ruin your reputation and destroy everything. My experience is that generally people want to do well. They want to help. They want to care for people. They want to be in relationship with each other. So the just culture algorithm says, let's not berate someone because something failed when they happen to be the user. And so instead, we go through, was it the system? Was this person properly trained? Were things communicated? Were all the resources available? In your own life, this would be, instead of someone say, let's say you have a fight with your significant other, you could say, it is my significant other's fault. They did everything wrong. Or you could say, all right, what were the steps that led up to this?
Mm.
What was in play? Did we get enough sleep? Have we eaten recently? Are we following the systems of communication? If we aren't following the communication systems that we set up for ourselves, why not? Why are we breaking these certain agreements? It allows a lot more flexibility because we don't have to be right.
Mm-hmm.
If we're in this just culture algorithm, we can say what else is here without losing face.
But deep dive into that a little bit more for me.
Sure.
Like how do we use this process in our relationships with our families, our friends, our loved ones? What's that process look like? I know you said reflect on those things, but how do we get to that point? Like how do we implement?
Well, there's a beautiful schematic that people can look up if they wanted to, and it's been
Yeah.
adapted in a variety of situations. But generally, what you're looking, I mean, the first question is, is this malicious or is it not? And if it's not malicious,
Mm.
was it the system? What are the elements of the system that it could have been? Could it, what were the things, what are the resources that this person needs? What are the, um, you know, what is the training that this person needs? In a relationship, that training would be something like, have I learned how to communicate successfully? Is this something that we need to learn how to talk about?
Yeah.
If you don't ever tell your significant other what you want in life, they're not going to know, as a
Right.
general rule. Uh,
Yeah.
as much, I mean, reading my mind would be fantastic. I would love it if everyone could do that, but that's
Right.
just, it's not how it shakes out.
So essentially what you're saying is you're creating a process even for relationships. Like
Yeah.
you're not, I think a lot of us just go with the flow. Like we don't really have a process of like, it's not like we're not methodical in how we wake up and how we brush our teeth and how we shower. It just becomes normal. But I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you're essentially creating a process for everything that you do.
You create a process for when something fails.
Got
So,
it.
this is the process of I am in a fight right now, or I'm really unhappy about
Mm,
something right now, and I want to fix it so that this doesn't happen again in the future.
got it.
Because we can remedy these things once. Um, I got really upset that my plants died. I fixed it once. I never have to think about it again.
Right. You created a process, or not even a process. You create a one-time solution, and that's it. You're done.
Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, what the right steps in building a system are to, like you said, isolate the problem. Okay, light bulb, there's a problem, and then factor in the possible solutions to prevent failure in the future.
And I would say isolating the problem is not a very easy thing to do.
Yeah.
That is it is we usually think we know the problem and
Yeah.
we're usually wrong. So that if you're going to break up your time of how you're going through this process, 50% of that is just figuring out what the problem is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. When do we defer from systems like and making decisions and not necessarily process and just follow our emotions? I mean, is there situations or examples where maybe we just follow our heart and don't think about process?
So I don't think that we ever make decisions without emotions.
Okay.
Even if we think we're incredibly rational and logical,
Mm,
we're usually not. We
yeah.
usually are influenced by something. Um, so
And I would argue the extreme. Like we always, most of the time, most people follow their emotions,
oh yeah.
not necessarily, they don't take the time to reflect and go through the process and evaluate options and, hey, how do we prevent mistakes? They don't do that. I guess
Well,
that's why we're talking about it today.
and I think it comes down to at a certain point, if you get tired of making the same mistakes or you get tired of the same outcomes, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Right.
So that's a really good time to sit back and say, okay, I've done this before.
Yeah.
I didn't like the result in the past. I don't like the result now. I'm ready for a change. And you don't have to do that all the time. Sometimes it can be, I'm fine with how this is. It's good enough. It's close enough. I certainly do not have time to control the process of every single step that I take
Yeah.
in my entire life. But if something is distressing me, if something is bothering me, if something is affecting my relationships, either professional or personal, that's a time where I say, okay, I want to do this better.
Yeah. I think sometimes people lack information or they feel helpless or they don't understand the path to a solution. And it's easy at times to victimize yourself and say, hey, I can't do this, or I don't have a solution. This happened to me. And um, you know, it's not always like that. Most of the time there is a solution. Most of the time you need to talk to either a mentor or talk to get the information is out there. So there's solutions. Whatever problem you've had right now, as we speak, listening to this podcast, somebody else has had the same problem. I guarantee it. So whatever it is, there's over 8 billion people in the world. It's and a lot of experiences. So, it's easy to feel like you're alone, but I think that, you just have to set your mind to it and find the solution for all of your problems.
Yeah. And with that, I would say baby steps.
Yeah.
because one of the problems that we can have is trying to bite off more than we can chew,
Yeah.
and just recycling that trauma again and again, saying,
Yeah.
"Okay, this didn't work."
Yeah. So I really enjoyed our talk about human factors engineering. I've learned so much. Uh, Last three questions of the day. I asked all my guests the same three questions. What is one thing you want to teach the world? Does not have to be related to this topic. Anything, if you could teach the world one thing, what would it be?
I mean, the very first thing that comes to my mind is to be less judgmental of our failures. Um, I think that by solving the right problems, I mean, it is, we all have this kind of childhood tendency that, you know, we want to think that problems are our fault. I mean, we don't, but in another sense, in childhood, would you rather believe that the problem was your fault, or would you rather believe that your parents are completely incompetent and the world is an unsafe place? Like, you'd rather be like, this is probably me. This is probably
Yeah.
because of me. Um, but as we go into adulthood, that becomes like inhospitable. So what I would love to teach the world is just to embrace our human experience, embrace loving ourselves, embrace accepting our failures, and I really see that as the recipe for success.
Yeah. I love that. And, one of one of my favorite quotes, and we've referenced this on the podcast before, and I don't know the exact quote, but I think it's something like, there's no such thing as mistakes. We learn from our mistakes. So going back to, and I wanted to kind of talk about this a little bit. I don't think you regretted dropping out of, or even going to medical school. You learned from it, and it was an experience that kind of led you to become who you are. So, I very much don't live my life in regret, and I try not to dwell over quote unquote mistakes, but it's difficult. It's difficult to reprogram yourself and not be affected by failure. But if we can all learn to adapt with whatever is mistakes and just be positive, and not let that get to us or impact us in a negative way, I fully support your comment. So I
Yeah.
love that. Thank you for sharing that. Is there a book that you maybe had a major impact on your life or changed the trajectory of your life?
I would probably say Grit by Angela Duckworth. She That book came to me at exactly the time that I needed to lean on my grit and I
Yeah.
guess make all of these changes.
Yeah. Very powerful. Last question for the day. I know that you're an executive coach and you're extremely bright and supportive. So I'm sure all of your clients are very happy with you. How do people get in touch with you?
Sure. So the best way is through my email, info@naturalbridgecoaching.com. You are welcome to check out my Instagram, but it is entirely empty, and that is also at Natural Bridge Coaching.
Very cool. Well, Zoe, I had such a good time talking to you today. Thank you for all the information. It was really informative. I hope you had as much fun as I did.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a really wonderful conversation. Thanks for having me on.
Loved it. And I remind everybody, like, follow, and share. Help us spread the word. Take care, Zoe.
Take care.